In the year 480 BC, the ancient world trembled before the march of an empire. Across the deserts of Persia and the plains of Asia Minor, a tide of men gathered, soldiers from every corner of a realm so vast, it touched the edges of the known world. They came under one banner, led by a king who believed he was chosen by the gods themselves, Xerxes I, son of Darius the Great. His ambition was not merely conquest, it was divine fulfillment. His eyes were set upon Greece, a land of independent city-states, fierce pride, and one dangerous idea: democracy. To Xerxes, Greece was an infection of rebellion that had to be erased. 10 years earlier, his father Darius had sent an army to punish Athens for defying Persian rule. But that army met disaster on the fields of Marathon. Against all odds, a smaller Athenian force had driven back the Persian invasion. For Darius, the humiliation was unbearable. He swore vengeance, but death claimed him before his revenge could. That burning oath fell to his son Xerxes, who took it as divine destiny to finish what his father could not. Xerxes was no ordinary ruler. He considered himself a god among men, destined to command the earth. For 4 long years he prepared for the greatest invasion in human memory. From the sands of Egypt to the mountains of India, he conscripted soldiers, sailors, and craftsmen. Vast fleets were built, weapons forged, and supply lines planned with near unthinkable precision. Herodotus, the father of history, claimed Xerxes' forces numbered in the millions. Modern scholars disagree, but even their modest estimates, between 70 and 300,000 soldiers, paint a picture of unimaginable scale. To move this colossal force, Xerxes ordered feats of engineering so audacious they bordered on madness. He carved a canal through Mount Athos to let his fleet avoid treacherous waters, and across the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Asia from Europe, he commanded an impossible structure, a bridge made entirely of ships lashed together with rope. When a storm destroyed the first bridge, Xerxes flew into a divine rage. He ordered the sea itself to be whipped 300 times, and the engineers who built it were executed. Then, without hesitation, he had it rebuilt. When his army finally began its march, the earth shook. Cities surrendered without a fight, terrified of the storm that was coming. Greece was not a united kingdom. It was a patchwork of rival states, each jealous of the other's power. Now, for the first time, their survival depended on unity. Some bent the knee to Persia, others prepared to die on their feet. Among those who refused to kneel were the Spartans, warriors unlike any the world had ever seen. They were bred not merely to fight, but to embody the art of war itself. In a land where every child was tested by hardship and every man trained to die for his city, the word fear had no meaning. And it was Sparta that would take command of the fragile alliance forming to face the storm. The man chosen to lead them was their king, Leonidas. His task was clear: hold the Persian tide long enough for Greece to unite, and the place where he would make his stand was a narrow mountain pass the locals called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. It was here that the fate of freedom would be tested against the will of a god-king. To understand the stand at Thermopylae, you must first understand Sparta, a city unlike any other in the ancient world. While Athens celebrated philosophy, poetry, and democracy, Sparta worshipped only one god: war. Every law, every breath, and every heartbeat in that city-state served a single purpose: to forge perfect soldiers. From the moment a Spartan child entered the world, his fate was decided not by chance, but by the state. When a boy was born, Spartan elders inspected him for strength and vitality. Any sign of weakness meant death. The infant would be cast out to die on the cold slopes of Mount Taygetus. Only the strong were allowed to live. Survival itself was the first test of the Spartan ideal. At the age of 7, every boy was taken from his family and placed into the agoge, a ruthless system of training and discipline that shaped them into living weapons. The agoge was more than military instruction. It was psychological warfare. Boys were starved to teach them endurance, beaten to harden their bodies, and taught to steal food without getting caught. If they failed and were discovered, the punishment was brutal. Not for the theft, but for being clumsy enough to be caught. Pain was not something to fear. It was a lesson in silence and strength. They learned to fight as one, shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, in the deadly phalanx formation that would one day face the Persian horde. By the time a Spartan reached manhood, he was no longer merely human. He was an instrument of war, molded by years of violence, deprivation, and iron discipline. Their armor shone like bronze fire under the sun, and their reputation alone could send tremors through enemy lines. Their words were few, their actions everything. A Spartan's wit was sharp, his courage absolute, and his loyalty beyond question. The idea of retreat or surrender was unthinkable. Even the women of Sparta were cut from a different cloth. Unlike the secluded women of other Greek cities, Spartan women trained their bodies, spoke their minds, and raised their sons to be fearless. There was a famous saying, "Come back with your shield," or on it. To drop your shield was to flee the fight, and for a Spartan, that was worse than death itself. It was this unyielding world that had created King Leonidas, a man of quiet resolve and unbreakable will. He was not just a ruler. He was the living embodiment of Spartan virtue, born from hardship, tested by fire, and bound to duty by the law of his ancestors. When word reached Sparta that Xerxes' vast army was crossing into Greece, Leonidas knew the storm could not be ignored. Yet, even then, fate placed one final obstacle before him. At that very moment, Sparta was bound by sacred tradition, the Carnea, a religious festival during which the laws forbade military campaigns. To defy that law meant to defy the gods themselves. But Leonidas also knew that hesitation meant annihilation. So in a move that would seal his place in legend, he struck a compromise with his elders. He would not send the full Spartan army. Instead, he would march north with his personal bodyguard of 300, hand-picked veterans, each a warrior of immense skill and courage. They were chosen not only for their strength, but for a haunting reason. Every one of them already had a living son. Leonidas wanted to ensure that no family line in Sparta would vanish with their deaths. It was a quiet acknowledgement of what he already knew, that the mission ahead was not a campaign, but a sacrifice. As the 300 prepared to march, Leonidas sought counsel from the oracle at Delphi. Her words came in the form of a riddle. Either Sparta must mourn a fallen king or her city will burn. For Leonidas, the meaning was clear. If Sparta was to live, he would not. And so, under the red banners of his ancestors, Leonidas and his 300 began their march toward Thermopylae, joined by small contingents from other Greek cities, Thespians, Thebans and Phocians who would stand beside them. The road ahead led not just to battle, but to immortality. The morning mist rolled over the narrow pass at Thermopylae, a place the locals called the Hot Gates. Steam rose from the sulfur springs, curling into the chill air like the breath of an unseen god. It was here, between the mountains and the sea, that a small Greek force prepared to face the largest army the world had ever seen. Leonidas surveyed the terrain, steep cliffs to one side, the sea to the other, and a single road just wide enough for a handful of men to stand shoulder to shoulder. This was no ordinary battlefield. It was a natural bottleneck, a place where sheer numbers meant nothing. To the Persians, it would feel like trying to push an ocean through a keyhole. The Greeks immediately began rebuilding an ancient wall that blocked the narrowest point of the pass. Behind it, they positioned their heavy infantry, the hoplites armored like bronze statues of war. Each hoplite carried a round shield called a hoplon, a long spear called a doru, and the discipline of countless drills. When they locked their shields together, they became one living wall, the phalanx, unbreakable when held by steady hands. Across the plain, the Persian camp stretched to the horizon. The air shimmered with heat from the thousands of fires that marked the presence of Xerxes' massive army. Tens of thousands of soldiers, maybe hundreds of thousands, from every corner of his empire stood ready. Egyptians, Medes, Indians, and Persians, each wearing strange armor, speaking strange tongues, but all united under one king's will. From his golden throne set high on a hill, Xerxes looked down at the narrow pass and laughed. For 4 days, he waited. He couldn't believe that this tiny Greek force dared to defy him. He sent messengers demanding their surrender, offering them safety if they laid down their weapons. Leonidas's answer was short, calm, and eternal. Molon Labe. Come and take them. When the Persians saw that the Greeks did not flinch, Xerxes grew impatient. He gave a simple order: attack. The first wave hit like a storm. Tens of thousands of lightly armed Persian infantry surged forward, their war cries echoing through the pass. They expected an easy victory, but the moment they met the Spartan wall, they were crushed. The long Greek spears punched through wicker shields, tearing into flesh. When a spear broke, a sword followed. When a sword snapped, fists and shields continued the slaughter. The narrow pass betrayed the Persians. Their numbers became a curse. Those in front were killed. Those behind couldn't retreat. The pass became a killing ground. Bodies stacked upon bodies, blood soaking into the earth. The Greeks fought in relays, each group taking turns to rest while the next held the line. Discipline, not rage, won the day. Xerxes watched from his throne, stunned. He had lost thousands, and the Greeks had barely been touched. That night the cries of the wounded filled the darkness. The air reeked of blood and salt. Yet in the Greek camp there was silence. The Spartans sat by their fires, calmly cleaning their weapons. To them it was just another day's work. At dawn, Xerxes tried again. This time he sent his best. The immortals, his elite royal guard, so named because their ranks never seemed to diminish. 10,000 men clad in fine armor marched into the pass, their golden spears gleaming in the sunlight. They advanced with precision, their banners fluttering like black fire. But once again the hot gates swallowed them whole. The Spartans and their allies fought like machines, pivoting their shields and thrusting their spears with mechanical rhythm. When the Persians tried to flank them, the narrow walls forced them back into the spear's deadly reach. At one point, Leonidas gave the order to feign retreat. The Greeks fell back a few steps, luring the Persians forward. Then, at his signal, the phalanx turned in unison, slamming forward with brutal force. The immortals shattered like glass. From his throne, Xerxes rose 3 times in fury. His invincible army was being humiliated by a few thousand men. For 2 days the Persians attacked, and for 2 days they failed. The Greeks had not just held the pass, they had made the name Thermopylae a symbol of defiance. But the gods, it seemed, had other plans. As night fell on the second day, a lone figure crept into the Persian camp. His name was Ephialtes, a local Greek who knew every twist of the mountains. For gold, he betrayed his homeland. He told Xerxes of a hidden goat path that wound through the hills, a path that would allow the Persians to circle behind the Greek lines. At dawn, under the cover of fog, Xerxes sent a detachment of his immortals to follow the traitor's trail. The betrayal had begun. The dawn came heavy with silence. Mist hung over the mountains like a shroud, hiding the treachery winding through the rocks above. Leonidas stood at the wall, his hand resting on his spear, sensing something in the air. The stillness before a storm. His instincts, honed through decades of battle, whispered that something was wrong. And soon those whispers turned to certainty. A scout came running down the slope, his face pale, his breath ragged. He fell to his knees before the Spartan king and gasped, "They're behind us." The Persians have found another path. For a moment, no one spoke. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Leonidas gave a slow nod. He had known this day would come, perhaps not how, but when. He called the commanders of the allied forces. The Thespians, Thebans, and Phocians gathered around him. His voice was calm, almost gentle as he explained the situation. The Greeks were surrounded. The Persians were closing in from both sides. There was no escape. Yet Leonidas did not speak of retreat, only of honor. He told them that any man who wished to leave should do so now. No shame, no judgment. Greece would need them for the battles yet to come. Many did leave, hearts heavy with respect and sorrow. But 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans chose to remain. They would stand with the Spartans until the end. To them, the pass was no longer a battlefield. It was a tomb of glory. Leonidas looked upon his men and saw not fear, but fire. Each warrior knew his fate, and still they stood taller. As the sun burned through the mist, the Persian horns echoed across the pass. The mountains seemed to tremble with the sound. Xerxes, believing his victory assured, sent his army forward once more. Front and rear, thousands upon thousands, closing in to crush the defiant few. Yet even surrounded, the Greeks advanced. The phalanx moved as one, bronze shields glinting red in the rising sun. The air filled with the thunder of marching feet and the clash of steel. Every thrust found flesh, every step was bought with blood. The Spartans fought not for victory, but for legend. Their discipline never wavered, even as their ranks thinned. They closed the gaps, their shields locking tighter, their movements sharper. When the Persians' numbers pressed too close, the Greeks drew their short swords and turned the narrow pass into a slaughterhouse. Spears broke, blades dulled, shields splintered, but no man faltered. They fought like lions, their roars echoing off the cliffs. To the Persians, it seemed as if death itself had taken human form and stood in their path. Xerxes watched in disbelief. For every Greek that fell, 10 of his men were dragged into the dust. He sent wave after wave, but the wall of flesh and will refused to yield. Only when the immortals arrived from the mountain path did the noose finally tighten. Leonidas knew the moment had come. He ordered his men to fall back beyond the broken wall, to the narrowest point of the pass, where they would make their last stand. Bodies of both Greek and Persian soldiers lay thick upon the ground, the air heavy with the stench of blood and smoke. Leonidas removed his helmet, letting the wind cool his sweat-streaked face. He looked to the sky, whispered a prayer to Zeus, and raised his spear one final time. The Persians surged forward, and Leonidas charged to meet them. His spear pierced through 2 men before snapping in half. He drew his sword and kept fighting, surrounded, unstoppable, unyielding. Arrows darkened the sun. Spears rained from every side, but still he fought. Even when his body was pierced, even when he fell to one knee, his eyes blazed with defiance. At last, the Spartan king fell where he stood, surrounded by his warriors, his body a shield for the men beside him. The Persians pressed on, killing every last defender. When the dust settled, the pass was silent again. Xerxes ordered that Leonidas's head be severed and placed upon a stake, a warning to those who dared defy him. But history had other plans. The story of Thermopylae spread across Greece like wildfire, of how a few hundred men stood against an empire and bought their people precious time. The sacrifice of Leonidas and his Spartans ignited the hearts of free men everywhere. Within a year, the Greeks would rise again at Salamis and Plataea, and this time, they would not fight to delay but to destroy in death. Leonidas achieved what no living king could. He turned defeat into immortality. The pass of Thermopylae became a symbol not of loss, but of courage beyond reason. And centuries later, when men speak of honor, they still whisper his words, "Come and take them." The smoke from Thermopylae had barely faded when the story began to spread. Messengers, sailors, and refugees carried the tale across the Aegean, of how 300 Spartans and their allies stood against the endless tide of Persia. In every city-state, from Corinth to Athens, from Delphi to Argos, men gathered to hear it whispered in awe. They spoke of warriors who faced death not with fear, but with pride. And slowly those whispers became a roar. In Athens, the news struck with both sorrow and fury. The people mourned Leonidas and his men, but beneath their grief burned a new determination. The sacrifice at Thermopylae had bought them time to rally, to build, to prepare for what was coming. Themistocles, the brilliant Athenian strategist, understood what few others did. The Persians had won a battle, yes, but they had awakened something far more dangerous: the unity of Greece. The Spartans, once seen as aloof and rigid, were now legends. Even their rivals bowed their heads in respect. The tale of their defiance became a song sung by poets, a prayer spoken by warriors. It wasn't just a story of death. It was a reminder that courage could be stronger than fear, that honor could outlive flesh. Across the sea, even Persian soldiers whispered of the men who would not kneel. Xerxes, the king of kings, had expected Greece to fall swiftly after Thermopylae. Instead, he found himself facing a nation transformed. His victory at the hot gates had come at too great a cost. Tens of thousands dead, morale shaken, and the illusion of invincibility shattered. When he marched into a burning Athens, he found no submission, only silence. The Athenians had fled, but they had left behind something far more dangerous than soldiers: resolve. It was at Salamis, not Thermopylae, that the echo of Leonidas's last stand became thunder. Themistocles lured the Persian navy into the narrow straits, where their numbers meant nothing. Greek triremes, swift and disciplined, rammed into Persian ships with brutal precision. The sea turned black with burning oil and red with blood. As Xerxes watched from his golden throne atop a cliff, the might of his empire broke apart before his eyes. And in that chaos, many claimed to hear it, the ghosts of Thermopylae, roaring through the smoke. The spirit of Leonidas had not died in the pass. It had sailed with every Athenian oar, burned in every Spartan heart, and bled from every blade that struck against tyranny. The stand of 300 had become the foundation of freedom. Months later, when the final Persian army fell at Plataea, the Greeks built a shrine. Upon its stone walls, they carved the names of the fallen at Thermopylae. No titles, no ranks, just men. Warriors who gave their lives for something larger than themselves. Above all their names, an inscription was etched, one that would outlive empires. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. The years turned to centuries. Empires rose and fell. The Persians faded, the Greeks splintered, and Rome would one day claim the same lands they fought to defend. But the story endured. In every age where men were asked to stand against impossible odds, the ghosts of Thermopylae rose again. Soldiers in faraway wars carried Leonidas's words like armor. Generals studied his tactics, poets wrote of his defiance, and children learned of the 300 who chose death over dishonor. Even in the modern world, a world of machines and empires of another kind, the name Thermopylae still commands reverence. It is no longer just a place. It is an idea, a reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. That sometimes the smallest stand can change the fate of nations. In the end, Leonidas did not need to survive to win. His death became a rallying cry that transcended time. His story, carved into history by blood and bravery, still burns in the heart of every man and woman who dares to face the impossible. The Persians may have taken the past, but the Greeks took eternity. And so the echo of Thermopylae lives on, not in the dust of the battlefield, but in the spirit of those who refuse to bow. As long as there are voices to tell the tale, the whisper will never die. This is where they stood. This is where freedom was born.